when a group of Chinese engineers arrived in the Philippines for what they believed would be a routine professional visit. They had no idea how deeply the experience would affect them. They expected meetings, site inspections, and technical discussions. Instead, they stepped into a country full of surprises, warm people, unexpected challenges, and lessons that went far beyond engineering. What started as a simple work trip slowly turned into an eye-opening journey that none of them would forget. The engineers came from different parts of China, each with years of experience in large infrastructure projects. They were confident in their skills and proud of the advanced systems they had worked with back home. The Philippines, to them, was a place they knew mostly from reports and blueprints. They expected slower progress, simpler methods, and many limitations. Their first few hours, however, already began to challenge these assumptions. As soon as they left the airport, they noticed something different. The streets were busy, sometimes chaotic, but full of energy. Vendors smiled, drivers joked, and strangers greeted them warmly. Despite traffic and noise, there was an easy rhythm to daily life. The engineers exchanged glances, surprised by how relaxed people seemed. It felt less rigid than what they were used to, yet strangely organized in its own way. Their first destination was a construction site in a provincial area. They expected outdated equipment and slow work. Instead, they found Filipino engineers and workers already active before sunrise. Teams moved efficiently, communicating clearly even without constant supervision. While the machines were not always the newest models, the way people worked together impressed the visitors. Productivity came not from pressure, but from teamwork and experience. During the site briefing, Filipino engineers explained the project challenges. Weather changes, soil conditions, and logistical issues often forced them to adapt plans quickly. The Chinese engineers listened carefully. Back home, many solutions depended on strict schedules and heavy machinery. Here, flexibility was just as important as calculations. The visitors began to realize that engineering was not only about formulas, but also about understanding the environment. One afternoon, heavy rain suddenly stopped work. The Chinese engineers expected frustration and delays. Instead, workers calmly secured materials and waited. Some even laughed and shared snacks. A Filipino supervisor explained that rain was part of life, not an enemy. You plan around it, not against it. This simple attitude surprised the visitors, who were used to fighting delays with pressure and urgency. Outside the site, the engineers were invited to eat lunch with local staff. The food was simple but flavorful. Conversations flowed easily, even with language barriers. The Filipino engineers asked about life in China, while the visitors asked about local customs. Laughter filled the small dining area. The Chinese engineers realized that trust and friendship made cooperation smoother than strict professionalism alone. Over the next days, they visited more sites, bridges, roads, and water systems. Each location had its own challenges. Limited budgets forced creative solutions. Instead of expensive imports, local materials were often used wisely. The Chinese engineers were surprised by how effective these solutions were. Efficiency did not always mean high cost. Sometimes it meant knowing exactly what was needed, and nothing more. One visit took them to a remote rural project. Reaching it required long travel over rough roads. The engineers expected complaints from local workers. Instead, they saw dedication. Workers treated the project as something personal, knowing it would help their own communities. This sense of purpose impressed the visitors deeply. In China, projects were often large and distant from daily life. Here, the impact was immediate and personal. At night, the Chinese engineers stayed in simple accommodations. There were power interruptions and limited internet. At first, this felt uncomfortable, but soon they found themselves talking more, reflecting on the day instead of staring at screens. They discussed engineering choices, cultural differences, and personal goals. The slower pace gave them space to think in ways they rarely did at home. Midway through the trip, a joint problem-solving session was held. A design issue had delayed progress. Instead of formal presentations, Filipino engineers gathered everyone around a table with sketches and notes. Ideas were shared openly, regardless of rank. The Chinese engineers were surprised by how junior staff spoke freely. The solution came quickly, built from many small ideas rather than one command from the top. This experience made the visitors reflect on leadership. In many of their past projects, decisions flowed strictly from senior engineers. Here, leadership felt more shared. Responsibility was spread across the team. The Chinese engineers began to see value in this approach. It created ownership, motivation, and faster adaptation, qualities essential in unpredictable conditions. Beyond work, the engineers were invited to explore local towns. They saw markets, schools, and small businesses. Despite limited resources, people found ways to improve their lives. Children studied hard, families supported each other, and communities worked together. The engineers realized that infrastructure was not just concrete and steel. It was deeply connected to human resilience. One evening, a Filipino colleague asked the visitors what surprised them most. After a pause, one engineer admitted he expected to teach more than he learned. Instead, he felt humbled. The group nodded in agreement. They had come with expertise, but were leaving with new perspectives. This honesty strengthened mutual respect between teams. As the trip continued, the Chinese engineers began sharing their own experiences more openly. They discussed large-scale projects, advanced technologies, and lessons learned from failures. Filipino engineers listened with interest, asking thoughtful questions. Knowledge flowed both ways. It no longer felt like visitors and hosts, but like professionals learning together. The final site visit focused on sustainability. Local engineers emphasized building systems that communities could maintain themselves. High-tech solutions were avoided if they required expensive upkeep. This philosophy resonated strongly with the visitors. They realized that true success was not only building something impressive, but building something lasting. As departure day approached, emotions became mixed. The engineers felt eager to return home, but reluctant to leave. The Philippines had challenged their assumptions gently, without confrontation. It showed them that progress could look different and still be effective. They understood now that engineering success depended as much on people as on technology. At a small farewell gathering, Filipino colleagues thanked the visitors for sharing knowledge. In return, the Chinese engineers expressed gratitude for the lessons they received. One engineer said the trip changed how he viewed his profession. Engineering was no longer just about solving problems, but about serving people and respecting local realities. On the flight home, the engineers reflected quietly. They thought about teamwork without fear, leadership with humility, and creativity born from limitation. These were not things found in manuals or textbooks. They came from experience and observation. Each engineer carried these lessons back with them, determined not to forget. Back in China, they shared stories with colleagues. Some listened with curiosity, others with disbelief. But the engineers spoke with conviction. They explained how adaptability, respect, and cooperation had led to real results. Slowly, their stories began influencing discussions in their own workplaces. The trip did not change their technical knowledge overnight, but it changed their mindset. They became more open to listening, more patient with uncertainty, and more aware of human factors. These changes showed in future projects where collaboration improved and solutions became more flexible. The Philippines was no longer just a location on a project map. It became a reminder that every place has something to teach, regardless of economic level or resources. The engineers learned that innovation does not belong to one country or system. It grows wherever people are willing to adapt. Years later, some of the engineers would still mention that trip as a turning point, not because of a single event, but because of many small moments, shared meals, rainy delays, honest conversations. Together, they reshaped how these professionals saw their work and the world. What the Chinese engineers did not expect was not failure or difficulty, but growth. Growth that came from humility, observation, and connection. The Philippines offered lessons that could not be measured in reports or budgets, but would influence decisions for years to come. In the end, the visit proved that true engineering goes beyond structures. It builds understanding between people and cultures. The Chinese engineers arrived expecting to give expertise. They left having gained wisdom. And that unexpected exchange is why their visit became a story worth telling.